Hi guys, it's Charisma here again today. I wanted to speak about something that hopefully will not offend many. But I was in an area, and I won't go into detail, and I had heard some women, and the statement was there was nothing wrong with a good old fashioned beating. And it brought me to a scripture. Um, Proverbs 14:24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Um, we have taken this scripture out of context. First of all, I want to speak to you about three different examples. First of all, I want to give you the definition of beating. And the Hebrew word for it is hakea, which means to flagellation, to defeat, collapse, or strike. I think what we don't really realize is that we silence our children, and we put fear in them that has no disrespect. I want to give an example of something I was reading about and studying, because where we had picked this up at, and it's just not in our culture, is in the slavery days, to silence and keep things in order to their standards. When a slave would not adhere to what was being said or what they wanted them to do, they would place that slave in a circle, circled around the other slaves, and they would beat him so bad that it would put fear in the remainder of the slaves, as well as that slave himself. This is where that has modeled after. It also came from, I don't know if you remember the movie The Ten Commandments with the Hebrew slaves. They beat them as well to keep them in order, to make them do as what they wanted them to do, whether it was right, wrong, fear, just or unjust. And the main point I wanted to make is that, you know, the actual interpretation of the scripture is not physical abuse, but rather authority and correct and instruction and guidance to warn and correct and not inflict harm. And the original Hebrew word for that in definition is yazar, which means to instruct with guidance. And I also wanted to once again give the third example of, you know, Jesus, when they were threatened by him and wanted him to adhere and bow down to what the Romans wanted him to do, they beat him. And that wasn't just a beating, it was called being flogged. And they used a weapon called a flagellum, and which we have known to use partially on our children, is a leather belt. And this flagellum was made like a leather belt, and it had other things attached to it that I will not go into the extremes, but they ripped his flesh off, as if you want to read about it. The point I'm trying to make is that, you know, we have to be very careful how we discipline, because we tell our children to be vibrant and speak up for themselves, but at the same time, in secret, we beat them and tell them not to open their mouths. So we have to make a choice on what we want them to do, either to be fearful and not speak up for themselves at all by being house and clothes in fear from being beat and not instructed correctively? Or do we want to instruct them correctively and respectfully have authority over them and have them speak freely and assertively? This is Charisma sounding off. You can leave comments if you choose. Have a blessed evening.